Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 4 of Philosophy 350 WI, Philosophies of Sex and Love at Finlandia University. I am Dr. Patricia Gross, the Assistant Professor of Philosophy at Finlandia University, and I am really happy to be here with you. This week, we're going to be reading two very different texts from our book that explores different understandings and have different philosophical explorations of love. I'm sorry I'm stumbling over my words. I'm recording this video right after I recorded the week 3 video, and as I said in the week 3 video, I was weeding the garden for the first time in way too long yesterday, and I did not put on bug spray, so I am just covered in mosquito bites, and so I had to take Benadryl last night and tonight, and it's kind of hard to stay awake, and we can power through together, don't worry. Let's get started, shall we? This is Cupid and Psyche. If you ever take my Philosophy of Desire course, we'll talk more about them. So the week 4 assignments are here. You're reading Finding and Then Losing Your Way, Eros and the Other in Greek Literature and Philosophy by Louis A. Ruprecht Jr. and Orchid Love by Phoebe Hart. They're both in our textbook. You don't have a required viewing this week. You have a bonus viewing because it would require you to pay for it. I think it's like $3 or something. It's the 2001 film Hedwig and the Angry Inch. Or if you can find the version of, like a more recent version, perhaps a recording of the stage play, then that's okay too. You have your discussion board post and, of course, short essay 2, which we'll talk about at the end of this lecture, should be pretty short this week. This is a quotation from the first page of the Ruprecht reading. Let's read it together. And I want you to pay attention to how Ruprecht weaves together different narratives in order to develop his account of Eros in Greek thought. He writes, in Eros the Bittersweet, Anne Carson writes, Eros is an issue of boundaries. He exists because certain boundaries do. In the interval between reach and grasp, between glance and counterglance, between I love you and I love you too, the absent presence of desire comes alive. But the boundaries of time and glance and I love you are only aftershocks of the main inevitable boundary that creates Eros, the boundary of flesh and self between you and me. And it is only suddenly at the moment when I would dissolve that boundary I realize I never can. If we follow the trajectory of Eros, we consistently find it tracing this same route. It moves out from the lover towards the beloved, then ricochets back to the lover himself and the hole in him, unnoticed before. Who is the real subject of most love poems? Not the beloved. It is that whole. Carson's reflection, Ruprecht continues, is inspired by Sappho's famous fragment, number 31, articulating a strange and elusive lover's triangle. I wanted to include this quote. So as we go through the Ruprechts, it will be like the presentation or the video 2 weeks ago where I'm just providing you these quotations and inviting you to consider them in your work this week. So let's continue. Ruprecht brings up a point that I waited to tell you, the place of the author of the symposium, or rather the absence. Plato is absent from his dialogues, and often the dialogues are given to us as retellings or retelling of retellings, or as very complicated, topsy-turvy kind of retellings. So in this case right here, right, Plato hints that Socrates told this story to Aristodemus, who told it to Phoenix, and Apollodorus. Phoenix told it to someone else, who told it to Glaucon, who got all mixed up. Apollodorus is telling it now to an unnamed person who appears to be one of the two main interlocutors. But the thing is, he's recounting his own retelling because Apollodorus had told it to someone else and checked it with Socrates. So really, there's a very big wateriness and murkiness when it comes to whether this story actually happened or what happened during this particular drinking party. We're pretty sure the drinking party happened, but we don't know what was said, and Plato really does emphasize that we don't quite know where things come from, right? So in the section the story, right, there's some good quotations here. Socrates is often described by people, including his interlocutors, as confuddling. He leaves them with tongues unable to speak as if they've been stung by a pufferfish, or perhaps as if they had taken a bunch of Benadryl. Let's look at the following quotations here. Aporos is literally a way, as in our Greek, excuse me, aporos in Greek is literally a way, as in our English idiom of finding your way or making your way. As far as Plato was concerned, Socrates' special genius lay in his unique ability to make us lose our way with words. The mythical lover's genealogy explains why Eros serves as Aphrodite's servant and confidant. First, because he was conceived on Aphrodite's birth, and second, since he is by nature a lover of beauty, he is forever drawn to the most beautiful of all divinities, Aphrodite. So on the one hand, Plato says that Socrates sometimes caused aporia, this kind of, explosion into the real and an inability to speak because Socrates is concerned with helping people lose their way. In a lot of ways, when we think about this, though, Socrates is trying to stop people from continuing on with a certain mindset that is stopping them from being able to understand what it is that they do not really know, what kinds of questions they should ask. And so we get this beautiful story from Diotima about the birth of love through an act of rape and an act of rape in a garden by poverty. Pinia raping Poros, who was drunk. Poros' way, cunning, craftiness. So love in this sense is both crafty and also lacking. Daimon is where we get our word for demon. However, in Plato's day, they did not necessarily have an evil connotation. Daimons are creatures of the between, spiritual beings who move between the physical world and that of the gods. They bring messages, they bring madness. In the Phaedrus of another Platonic text, ostensibly about love, Socrates is stopped by his daimon from physically moving as he had given an argument that was not approved by the gods. And finally, I put this quotation, it's not finally, but I put this quotation here to emphasize the history of sexuality that it's always good to think about, especially at this early part in our course. So Ruprecht writes, the central point to hold in view is this: sexuality is modern, sex is not. We owe our modern discourse of sexuality and sexual identity orientation to psychology, and with it to the enormously influential taxonomy of heterosexuality versus homosexuality, a taxonomy whose very universality resulted in a sudden, rather condensation of sexual categories around the turn of the 20th century. The term homosexual and heterosexual is very young. There was no conception of heterosexual as a word before the 19th and 20th century, just so you know. So Greek sexuality is complicated. We can talk about that more. If you would like me to talk more, maybe make a video about Greek sexuality, I'd be more than happy to. But we don't necessarily need to get into it at this moment, I think. And finally, tragedy and comedy. At the end of the dialogue, Aristodemus was pretty much coming in and out of consciousness because he was so drunk. And he overhears Socrates claiming that comedy and tragedy should be written by the same author. And this is relevant. That's why the last part of the chapter is that, or the second to last part of the chapter is comedy and tragedy. Finally, mortals and immortals. Let's read this quote together. And I want you to think, what does it mean to you? And I'm looking forward to seeing how you explore Eros in your discussion board and paper this week. Eros is not sex. It's not identity. It's not substance, and it's not God. Socrates observes that it would require God to say what the soul actually is, that human beings are especially adept at saying what things are like. Eros, then, is a metaphor, or is the metaphor that we live by. I should think of Eros as a metaphor. It's what is it like? Is it a definition of the soul? What is going on here? What is love? And that's our big question from last week. What is love? We didn't get an answer. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to say in your discussion boards and your paper. Orchid Love by Phoebe Hart is perhaps my favorite among these very lovely chapters in our text. I would like you to read this chapter with an open mind and, as always, with an open heart. And I will not lecture on this chapter, as that's your job. And so let's turn to the assignments. This is an orchid, by the way. It's very pretty. So, week 4 discussion board. This week, there are 2 parts of the discussion board. In part 1, that's due on Wednesday, as a class, you must collectively summarize Finding and Then Losing Your Way, Eros, and the Other in Greek Literature and Philosophy by Louis A. Ruprecht Jr. The initial summary synopsis is due Wednesday by 11:59 p.m. I've made a Google Doc for you to facilitate this assignment, and it can be found here. It is a lot less, like, I guess, filled out than the previous one that I created, but that's because you have more time, I think, to figure it out now. I think might know now what I'm looking for. Part 2, which is due Thursday by 11:59 p.m. This part is to help you prepare for your short essay too. For this part of your discussion board, I'd like you to individually write a 200-word response to Phoebe Hart's essay. In what ways does her essay move you? What challenged you and why? And I'd like you to respond to your classmates to that by Friday. Short essay 2, finally. You may wonder why I assigned Orchid Love this week, given that Phoebe Hart does not write extensively on Eros. However, she does in her own way. Her essay style includes a more traditional essay interspersed with what she calls provocations. The provocations, in italics in the essay, are their own narrative. They tell their own chronological story, her story, but they're woven into the tapestry of her larger text, which is a philosophical essay. This week, you will write an essay on Plato and love. You may utilize parts of your discussion board activities to aid in your essay writing process. Your essay must explore at least 2 of the speeches of the symposium. One has to be a diatema speech, though. You must also discuss Rupek's interpretation of Plato and Eros. Weave into your essay at least 4 provocations in the style of Hart's essay. These provocations must come from your own perspective, from your own point of view, and I'd like you to copy Hart in her italices. So if you look here, our discussion board, as usual, is written here, and your short essay 2 is due here. So the discussion board is here, and then the link as well to the document is there. Let me see if I just click on it. I hope it works. Yeah, so you guys haven't seen, I haven't even added your names to it yet because I didn't want to muddy the waters. And then you have your short essay 2 prompts, which is here. Okay, so the prompt for short essay 2 is here, what I just said, but then you've got our additional requirements and then the self-assessment rubric that I'd like you to complete. And finally, I hope you all have a wonderful week. I know this is a very short lecture, and if you'd like to hear more from me, we can have office hours. We can have private conversation. I can hold a Zoom session if you guys are interested in having a kind of one, like a more one-to-one conversation. You know, if we want to have an official class session, that's up to you. They can just let me know. Right now, I'm going to continue doing it like I have been. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and a wonderful week, and stay safe, stay healthy, stay sane. All right, goodbye.